Today I want to share another insight, a slightly longer one, that came from rewatching something. This time it was a newer HBO series, and just like that, which is a revival of Sex and the City, a show about the lives of four female friends in New York City. I watched every episode of the original series, and I was curious enough to watch the revival as well. What struck me immediately was how one of the friends, Samantha, simply disappeared from the picture. And the more I thought about it, the more it reminded me of what escaping a narcissistic female friendship actually looks like in real life. You don't just leave the person. You leave the entire sphere of influence. You go no contact not only with the narcissist, but with the social ecosystem around them. Ideally, you avoid a final confrontation. You keep the illusion of a relationship intact just long enough to prevent a smear campaign, and then you quietly rebuild your life from scratch. Far away from everything and everyone you used to know. As a side note, a very similar pattern can be observed in what is essentially a global reality show, the ongoing media spectacle unofficially known as British royal family life reporting. Harry's situation follows the same structure. To be free, he had to leave the country, detach from the entire system, and build a life with a woman who was not embedded in his family's narcissistic structure. She was his exit. His ticket out. His chance to have a reality that belonged to him. What makes his situation particularly brutal is that most of the media worldwide instinctively takes his family's side. Their status is immense, and aligning with them is beneficial. Stripping Harry of belonging to the royal system effectively turns him into a permissible target, someone who can be mocked, attacked, and devalued without consequence. It signals to anyone hungry for approval, relevance, or advancement within those influence structures that feeding on him is acceptable. The reach of that influence is enormous. Through the Commonwealth, political alliances, and cultural power, they shape narratives far beyond the UK. A single word from such a system can elevate or destroy. That is why I can speak openly about this. I am too small to matter. If I were visible enough, I would either avoid the subject entirely or be forced to lie and take their side just to remain socially and professionally alive. That is how perception is manufactured. Through fear, status, and control, no different from any other mafia structure. The result is a familiar inversion. The abuser is framed as the victim, and the victim is framed as the aggressor. Escaping such systems is especially difficult when you come from high-status elite groups. The entire world is watching, commenting, judging. There is no anonymity. There is nowhere to hide. But back to and just like that. As I reflected on the characters, I realized something interesting. Even though Harry is often framed as the problematic one in public narratives, if this were a real-life social group, it would most likely be her, not him, who would function as the narcissistic female friend. The kind who covertly pushes someone like Samantha out because she refuses to submit. Samantha is an easy target. She is a lone wolf, even in relationships. She does not rely on the group for identity or validation. She openly plays the role of the bad one, the one who supposedly doesn't care. That self-presentation makes her disposable in narcissistic systems, and therefore perfect to scapegoat and quietly erase. And that, too, is part of how these systems work. To me, what looks provocative on the surface often feels like a facade that hides a very soft, deeply humane self underneath. That softness is sheltered from the narcissistic world because it has already been wounded too many times. The facade is not arrogance or hardness, it is armor. It is what allows someone like that to move through a hostile world without being destroyed by it. People like this are actually among the best targets for narcissistic abuse. They can see the structures narcissists create, but they refuse to be caught by them. They play by the rules just enough to survive, and they are often very successful at doing so. Because of that, many narcissists mistake them for narcissists themselves. But a more observant narcissistic eye can detect what is underneath, the yummy, soft, independent core. That is precisely what makes them dangerous to narcissistic systems. They can engage with systems, but they do everything they can not to be absorbed by them. They are independent, internally strong, and they do not want to create hierarchies or systems of control. They prefer interacting with free individuals rather than collecting subjects and supporters. And that is a threat to anyone who needs a system of loyalty, admiration, and submission to function. A person like Samantha could easily influence others simply by existing. Not through preaching or rebellion, but by demonstrating freedom. She could make other people start to want out too, out of being subjects in a covert monarchy they don't even realize they belong to. When I watch the character of Carrie, I notice something very specific in myself. There is a kind of brain fog of admiration. She is pleasant to watch, charming, polished, seemingly kind and well-behaved. And I recognize that feeling very clearly. Because it is the same feeling I've had in real life when being close to narcissistic female friends. It's the sensation that they are so put together, so good, that part of you wants to bow. Not dramatically, not consciously, but quietly, through subtle submission. That feeling is a major red flag for me. What made my stomach turn was the way Carrie appeared hurt and victimized by Samantha cutting her off. I've seen this exact energy many times before. The same tone. The same emotional posture. It is a narcissistic reinterpretation of events. An inversion that quietly turns the person who left into the aggressor, and the one who remains into the wounded victim. To an untrained eye, it doesn't look like manipulation at all. And that is why it works so well. It reliably wins sympathy, support, and validation from those around. At the same time, it leaves no concrete proof that could ever be used against the narcissist. That is why, when you look at these dynamics from the outside, you can almost never be certain. Without knowing the inner workings, without understanding the invisible structures and pressures involved, healthy behavior and narcissistic behavior can look remarkably similar. Context and containment matter. This is simply my interpretation, based on patterns I have seen and lived through many times in real life. Analyzing these dynamics here does no harm, because I am not diagnosing people. I am recognizing structures. And seeing patterns is always useful. It is important to say this clearly, all of this should be treated as analysis of fictional characters and fictional dynamics. Applying this kind of interpretation to real people and real situations can be damaging. In real life, it is usually best not to take sides in these kinds of dynamics at all. The safest position is presence, observing without being pulled in. The moment you become an ally inside such a dynamic, you are very often recruited into someone else's narrative. And more often than not, that narrative belongs to a narcissist playing the victim, seeking confirmation, witnesses, and minds that will adopt their inverted interpretation of events. When that happens, the real victim is trapped even deeper, not by direct attack, but by perception. By stories being repeated, believed, and emotionally reinforced. This is how harm spreads quietly, without visible aggression, and why so many people participate in it without realizing what they are doing. Staying neutral is refusing to become a tool in someone else's narcissistic psychological structure. Thank you for listening and see you next time.